Hey folks, my name is Will Jarvis. Along with my dad, Dr. David Jarvis, we record the podcast Narratives. Narratives is a project exploring stories about progress. In what ways are we better off now than in the past? Are there ways that we are worse off? What is the ideal future? How do we build it? Join us as we explore these questions with some of the brightest minds in the world. Hey folks, today we're sitting in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It's kind of a chilly day out. It's November, what's today's date? I don't even know. Late November. Heading towards Thanksgiving.
I don't know.
Pretty good day. Today I've got my good friend Coop with me, Cooper Williams. And Coop is a machine learning engineer, and you've had kind of a interesting career so far. I know you're still young, but you've trained in Lambda school. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. So I'm 25.
Gotcha.
I think you're about the same age, right?
Yeah, 26, right there.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I went to Lambda school for data science. And I got hired by Will straight out of Lambda school. So that was cool because we actually met long before I graduated. In fact, I think it was a month or two after I moved to the area and started Lambda school, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's right. We met at a Slate Star Codex meetup.
That's right.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And just for context, Coop is probably the most talented machine learning engineer I think I've met.
Dang, man, that means a lot.
all my other friends that are machine learning engineers are now going to come after me, but that's okay.
Oh boy.
Yeah, they got to prove their mettle.
All right, well, you better start learning jiu-jitsu with us.
Exactly. It's great. It's great.
Watch your back.
So is there anything else I should add on your bio side that people might like to know that might be interesting?
Oh, well, I don't know. I'm sure it'll all come out in the discussion. I don't know. I don't know. I was previously a filmmaker. I guess that's the main thing is, I was a filmmaker for 9 years before doing, touching anything programming. So
that's really, what kind of films were you making?
Not really films. So I made some short films in college, but the main gist of what I did was a lot of ads, a lot of small business ads.
Interesting.
That did not make me very much money, but they kept me afloat.
That's cool.
I was like a one-man film crew. So I worked for a marketing agency that had a lot of small town clients in Oklahoma. Although there were some banks in there, there was a congressman.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I would just sit down with them and say what kind of video you want, and we would just make it. And I sold those videos for pennies on the dollar. I did not know how to sell, because I was always super critical of my work.
Yeah.
I never became the filmmaker I wanted to be, and I ended up just making a lot of educational videos. After that, because shooting on a set and setting that up and bringing people in to be my crew, that all just stressed me out. So I just started doing video editing after that, and that's actually how I ended up doing computer science. Was I just got interested in computer science, started making educational videos about that and about economics, and then I started teaching myself data science, and then did Lambda school. And
you're an instructor as well.
That's right. Yeah. Currently, I'm on top of my full-time gig with Tanjo.
Yeah.
I am doing a side gig where I'm a teaching assistant at a company called Correlation One, and I'm in their empowerment program, which is meant to bring traditionally disadvantaged communities, minority students.
You're hearing the cat.
My cat is attacking the microphone. You can toss him off.
It's okay. It's really pleasant, actually.
Okay. He's a sweetheart. Yeah, so I'm working with DS4, Correlation One's DS4A, DS for All empowerment program, which brings together 500 minorities fellows to learn data science for the first time.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, mostly geared towards like a business focused data analyst position.
Gotcha.
So we're just getting the foundations really strong.
Very cool. Very cool. So before we jump from here, in video production, and you mentioned, the product wasn't exactly what you wanted. Yes, yet. Have you ever heard the Ira Glass talk about this? He's like,
no.
The real problem with creating art is that the art isn't great in the beginning, or like as you get better, you're like, wow, like you start producing, and then it hurts because it doesn't feel as good as it should be, if that makes sense.
Right. You've got this vision, and the reality is just crap next to your vision.
Exactly. And like pushing through that is like something difficult. But anyway,
yeah.
Interesting. So this is really kind of practical, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but are there easy gains to be made if you're producing a video? Is there where are the easy wins, if that makes sense? Is it quality equipment? Is it, I don't know, planning?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the first thing I would say, the boring answer is audio.
Really?
You can have a terrible camera. And
Gotcha.
If your audio sounds good, then the audience accepts it as being not cheap.
Interesting.
So then I would say that's a prerequisite for making a good video.
Oh, wow.
And I'll admit I was never that great of an audio engineer. Never that great of a
audio
sound
can get
guy.
really complicated.
Yeah, it's a pain. But the thing is that if your audio's bad, that's the first thing somebody notices, and
Interesting.
They never get out of the feeling of watching a video, right?
Gotcha.
And never get into it. The fun answer to that is the writing. If you just have the creativity and you have a mind to sit down with the person who's paying for it and say, what do you want? What feeling do you want to evoke in the video? Also, who's your audience, of course, and what is the emotion for them? Then that's going to be where most of your quality is. That's going to be where all of the magic happens. And your camera could be crap. Your colors aren't perfect, but at least if you're focusing on that emotion, you're going to get something good.
Gotcha. That's super interesting.
I'll tell you an example. So there was a business coach who I was hired by to make this video, make a video entry for a competition that was this international business coach video competition. And we entered not only in that, but in just a general, I can't even remember what it was. But bottom line is we entered this competition going up against some really big companies. And on a budget of $3,000, I made a video that beat two companies with a combined worth of $73 billion.
No way.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
So those two companies came in second and third place, and on a budget of $3,000, which tells you how much I was charging.
Right.
I beat those guys in an international competition.
Wow. And what do you think? What do you credit your success on that? Was it taking the time to really focus on the problem, or what do you think it was?
Well, for one thing, we made the video based on a poem that the business coach had written, which was just really it was really unique. He had put his heart and soul into it, and it was about business coaching.
That's awesome.
But it had a real charm to it.
That's cool.
And we just a lot of the video was royalty-free footage that I just scrounged the internet for. A lot of
$3,000, budget $3,000.
Exactly, yeah. That was my B-roll, right? It was artistic B-roll.
Yeah.
And then and then I shot a lot of stuff on OU campus, which is really pretty.
Yeah.
And I used this cheap Steadicam gimbal that was only worth $200, and just really painstakingly made these Steadicam shots. So I basically just, we just made a plan for what we wanted it to look like, and then we did it.
That is so cool. Yeah, that reminds me, it seems like people in some sense overrate money. The money has this really weird effect on people. It's very, people really like it, they really want it, but money's just pure optionality. It's just you can do whatever with it, but it seems like ideas are oftentimes much more important, having good ideas, especially nowadays. Yeah. Maybe more than ever.
Yeah, I agree.
And executing on it.
And having some kind of, causal link between your ideas. This series of images and words is going to evoke a certain emotion in this audience. You're focused on a certain goal. Money is very generalizing. It makes you think about, I don't know, you're just optimizing for getting money, which is just like the broadest goal imaginable. But if you want to win a competition with a certain audience, that brings out some creativity.
Build it to the criteria. Yeah. Interesting. So I wanted to move on a little bit. I want to talk about an academic that you actually put me onto. She's really interesting. Elinor Ostrom.
Elinor Ostrom, yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about her and why she's important and overlooked, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, she's less overlooked nowadays, I think. She's gaining popularity due to people like Tyler Cowen,
Gotcha.
who have made videos about her. And so she is the first woman who ever won the Nobel Prize. I think recently there was another woman, economist. Her name is, she's French.
Banerjee, maybe?
Oh, yeah.
Can't remember her first name.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think she's married to a Banerjee, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yeah. And he also won. They both won the prize.
That's right.
I don't know if it's separate together, however.
Right. I can't remember her name. God dang it. But anyway, so sorry, this is probably PG.
It's all good. I think that passes.
So yeah. Anyway, Elinor Ostrom is the first woman to win economics Nobel Prize, and she struggled against all these institutional barriers to women in economics, because when she started, it was women literally weren't allowed in the economics school.
Wow.
And she had to go a different route.
Jeez.
But anyway, her whole scholarship is about the idea of common pool resources. So these are resources that are scarce resources, usually natural resources, but not always.
Gotcha.
Where it's really difficult to exclude people from using them up.
Interesting.
So you can think of this as like outside of the realm of government jurisdiction, or should I say, outside of the realm of state control and private control. It's like there's a third sphere of society when it comes to resource allocation that's called the commons. And so examples of this are like fisheries,
Gotcha.
Woods, watersheds, like an aquifer. So these are things where someone could deplete the resource if they weren't careful. And so what she studied was, why are some of these resources stewarded really well, sometimes for over 1,000 years, without anybody depleting them, and some of them are not. She has this great book called Governing the Commons. At the beginning of it, she has this masterful theoretical overview where she basically says, have you heard of the prisoner's dilemma?
Yeah.
So just to sum it up, like, if you have two people who can't talk to each other and they can they could cooperate without talking to each other. If they did cooperate, they would get a big payoff. But also the incentives are such that if they cheated against each other, then they would get a really crappy payoff, but they're both incentivized to cheat against each other, right?
Yeah.
So she takes that and she says that's the framework people usually think of common pool resources as being limited by. She says this is the huge excuse. This is the number one excuse that policymakers use for taking people's stuff and saying you can't steward this common pool resource. We're doing it for you. And so at the outset of the book, she says, I'm going to show all these examples where you don't have to do that, and people can govern those resources effectively.
Wow. So could you give an example of a common pool resource that was governed well? So I have an example of one that was governed poorly. Mm-hmm. If you think of like Easter Island and the trees on Easter Island. So, they had the big statues on Easter Island, and they used up all the trees, moving these around. And the problem was when you took away a certain number of the trees, the wind could start blowing them over. Oh. And then eventually it's like you can't build canoes to get away from Easter Island. And then, Malthusian struggle. Yeah. So they did a poor job. What's an example of someone doing a good job?
Yeah, that's a good
governing the commons.
Good question. So there was one. So there were a number of examples that she gives, as well as ones that failed. But one example is there was a town. It was in Central Europe. There was a village, I believe the Swiss Alps, a village that had a limited amount of grazing area, and yet, and the grazing area was fragile to some extent, and yet they managed to allocate the use of those grazing resources for over 1,000 years, without sort of depleting the resource.
Interesting.
So farmers basically had a system set up to say who can use those fields when, and the crucial thing was they had ways of keeping tabs on each other. So she says that this is one of the most important things is that the people who use the resources can set the rules on how the resource is used, and they can also keep tabs on each other and observe that the rules are being followed. So if you can see that the rules are being followed, then you will self-enforce.
Gotcha.
And so there was no government like as such. It was just it was a horizontal enforcement.
That's interesting. That almost reminds me of the pirate code. Have you heard the pirate code?
No. So
the pirate code's really important. The pirate code is that if you surrender to the pirates, they won't kill you, and they'll just take you back to the nearest port, drop you off. And it was really important that all pirates maintain the code, because if you start killing people after you took their stuff, then they wouldn't surrender. And it's easier to just have them surrender than actually go and fight with people and the British Navy.
There you go. Yeah. That's smart, and that makes sense as a rule.
But you do need some like enforcement mechanism, so you don't have one person that goes off the rails. And
that's right. Yeah, you have to have what she calls graduated sanctions, and it's basically a series of like sort of punishments, I guess, against someone who breaks the rules, and they're usually enforced on a case-by-case basis by the other people who are using the resource.
Interesting.
This is one of 7, I believe, guidelines that she gives for, or principles, actually, design principles for common pool resources. So one example of that would be logging in Japanese forests. There would be these villages where, you didn't want to overlog, like Easter Island. And so there were set times where people could go out and log. And if you were caught by one of your neighbors logging in an unauthorized manner, your neighbor would basically demand a certain amount of sake from you.
Interesting. That's funny.
And that was how they enforced it on a case-by-case basis.
Oh, wow.
The sanction, it could be a lot of sake, it could be a little
sake,
right. Depending on how crappy your family was doing that year economically. But that basically helped them equilibrate and successfully preserve that resource.
Interesting. Is this somewhat limited by group size? So is there a size where this starts becoming more difficult?
Yeah. This is where you get to the Dunbar number, right?
Okay.
Like 250 people or something is supposedly the number of people that you can know personally.
Gotcha.
And have like as part of a tribe. I'm not sure how much I buy that, and frankly, I'm not qualified to say what the ramifications of that are. But it is clear that, and this brings me to think about some of the other examples she gave. In many systems, there were thousands of people participating.
Gotcha.
So one example would be the, what do they call them? Ribbon farms in India. They had super long farms that were irrigated by one stream. So they were, you can picture like a bunch of ribbons coming off of the river. And there were thousands of people, and each of those systems was like, there was a hierarchy of responsibility. Each region had its own, officials. So there was just councils upon councils like sending up the representatives, and that all worked really well until the British came.
They came, blow it up.
Right, yeah. Something similar... Well, technically something similar happened with Californian watersheds.
Interesting.
But I don't know if you would call that several participants necessarily, or like thousands of participants, because that was more about organizations using the water, I think.
Gotcha. Interesting. So how did you find Ostrom's work? What kind of led you there?
Well, I lived with an economist for a couple of years.
Oh, interesting.
So and basically when you live with an economist, you learn to recognize incentives. You learn to, well, I don't know. I shouldn't generalize, actually. Living with this guy.
This economist.
Yeah, living with this particular economist. We were just really interested in, what are the reasons that government tries to take your stuff and hurt you, and think of how we can, civilly sort of talk the smart people out of that.
Right.
And, and maybe how to, get them on our side against the people who don't know any better. Right.
Right.
Because there are plenty of those people in power as well.
Definitely.
So yeah, this is a crucial, I think, crucially underrated thing in political economy, is that the role of the commons is everywhere. There are common pool resources that are intangible, such as like neighborhood goodwill, things like that.
Interesting.
That are just not legible to state actors, not legible to policymakers, and so they're overlooked and overrun. Plenty of examples of this in governing the commons as well. Very interesting.
Very interesting.
But yeah, living with an economist, I recommend it.
Highly recommend it. You learn a lot.
Yeah.
That's cool. So you talked a little bit about, government coming to take your stuff, and, hurt people,
Yeah.
So generally, our government has a monopoly on violence in this country. Do you think that's preferable to other systems? Is that not preferable? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a very sly way of asking that question, I have to say.
Exactly.
Well, I've debated whether, how much of this I should say on a podcast, but, I basically believe that people have, individuals have a right to control how their bodies are used and control how their own property is used. And that's just like the basis of my belief.
Gotcha.
I think that there are probably some holes in that argument, like some sort of corner cases where you might want to take that away from people, but as a general guiding principle, I think it works.
And that does seem to be fairly common sense morality too.
I
feel like most people would tend to agree with that, although I could be wrong.
Yeah. And so this is where, if you take that as a really solid position, it becomes a radical thought, because it's sort of, if you take that as the root of your political philosophy, then it has very big ramifications for how you live the rest of your life. And
right.
Who it is that you want to associate with, and, the kinds of careers that you pursue. Anything.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
And where was I going with this? I sort of lost my train of thought there. But, I think that in general, people think that we need to control others because of the coordination problems we were just talking about.
Right.
They see that things go wrong in a way that isn't easy to control. They see that resources are wasted. Sometimes they think that the world is moving too fast. Sometimes they think that the world is moving too slow.
Right.
And that needs to change. And I can't blame them too much, because not everyone's a nerd like me. And so I've sort of dialed back the tenor of my radicalism. But essentially, I think that I have faith in people's ability to find new ways to coordinate and solve coordination problems. I think that money is still an underrated tool for coordinating, for solving coordination problems. Instead of my tribe ambushing your tribe,
right.
Or getting ambushed and we're both living in fear, we can trade.
Right.
And we're all pursuing the thing that we're good at, theoretically. Of course, in the current economy, that is not the description I would use. But I think that the next step of solving coordination problems is computing.
Interesting. Even
though I've only been studying computing for a couple of years, I think that it has profound possibilities for allowing humans to pursue their goals in a harmonious manner, and generally coexist in a more efficient way.
Right.
I don't know. That's a really weird thing to say, but computing is obviously has efficiency ramifications. Yeah. But the coordination problem thing, that's the main thing.
Interesting. And on that front, do you think in general governments have become more coercive or less coercive as time has gone on? Or in this current state, do you think where are they on the median?
Yeah, I think that's not such an easy question, because coercion can come in different forms, right? Like, there are postmodernists. Okay, so before I get into that, obviously, if you wanted to live out on the frontier, marry whoever you wanted at 15, have like 8 kids,
right?
Eat whatever mushrooms you find,
yeah, exactly,
type of thing.
Yeah,
you could very easily do that 2,000 years ago in many places. It's only like this idea of a totalizing government is very new.
Interesting.
And so in that sense, we're less free. In another sense too, there's, like I was going to say, postmodernists have talked about control systems that are more psychological in their nature.
Interesting.
So, a common refrain to political malcontents these days is, if you don't like this country, you can leave it, and you can go live in the woods or do whatever you want. Right? Technically, that's true. It's just not convenient.
Right.
All your family are in civilization.
Yes.
And there are definitely things that the government will extradite you for. So, whatever.
Exit rights are really somewhat non-existent in that sense.
Yeah, exit rights. Exactly. So voice and exit are kind of the two crucial things, I would say.
Gotcha.
And yeah, governments nowadays don't really make that possible for everybody. I think that if you or I wanted to leave this society, raise our fist and say, screw you, we could do it.
Yeah.
We could just go to, I don't know, Thailand. We could go to Chile. I don't know, wherever the kids are going these days.
Exactly.
But most people can't do that.
Right.
So I guess that's the problem, is that I see a lot of poverty as being caused by government, and
interesting.
And I see modern government as chaos in a lot of ways.
Gotcha.
The sheer depth of bureaucracy and the depth of mediocrity that is governing us just creates a stagnation and a chaos that just permeates people's lives at every level.
That's very interesting. And that doesn't seem like it was always the case, right? You had the New Deal, all the most competent people went to Washington. Mm-hmm. And, the Tennessee Valley Authority, they built all these things. Yeah. It's almost like those libertarian critiques have become more real as time has gone on.
Well, you remember the New Deal was largely a make-work program, right?
That's right. Oh yeah, digging holes, filling them back in again.
So it's hard for me to really say where all that mediocrity comes from, honestly, because like if you look back at those times, it really does seem like at least things were getting built.
Right. Yeah. There's some sense in like the people the bureaucrats could pick a target, even if it was, digging up a hole and filling it back in again, and could successfully go do that. And there seems to be much less capability for that to happen now.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure you've seen Patrick Collison's thing on how fast things were built.
Right.
Yeah. And but also part of me wonders if a lot of that isn't just historically contingent with respect to technology. Like there is actually we actually had a lot of low-hanging fruit to pick, technologically speaking, and then we sort of hit the ceiling with that.
Gotcha.
I think there's an argument for that in many sectors of the economy. I should know particular examples of that. But yeah.
Right. Yes. It seems like in certain areas things are hard. Like super string theory, there's like 100 people that can understand it, and that's probably they probably hit some walls there, right? But you and I have no way of ascertaining whether that's true or not.
Exactly. Here, an example of something that's not subject to that probably is education, which is just, I think education has, it's been buoyed up a lot by technology. People like kids, adults, you can learn anything on YouTube. Right. Just from someone who's really passionate about it. At the same time, education has become this machine for creating people who don't do anything. Like it's not aimed at anything. It's sort of this mindless. Who's the guy? John Dewey. It's this Deweyan system for creating good citizens that is stuck in like 100 years in the past.
Right.
It's not tuned to the human in terms of the human's needs, their communal needs. It doesn't keep up with modern technology. It's not flexible. It doesn't make itself amenable to children's passions.
Right.
I don't know. I hate it so much.
A lot of problems.
Yeah.
And you're somewhat working in that area now with, being your instructor in data science.
Right.
How is that different, and do you do curriculum design at all, or in what, are you just an instructor?
Not for this. Yeah, for this program, I'm not doing curriculum design as such,
Okay.
although I am making some ad hoc videos just that I'm not even getting paid for. I just sort of like, I see what the students are struggling with, and I just like
you want to help
make a
them.
quick video about, here's Docker in 20 minutes, or like,
Very cool.
Here's what every Python object is under the hood type
Nice.
of thing. And but yeah, I did do curriculum design for Thinkful, which was it was this spring actually. Wow, that's weird.
All
Seems
blurs
like a
together
long time
now.
ago. Yeah, I did. I wrote a supplementary data analytics curriculum for Thinkful, so I've done some of that. I think that so part of that was just because I could do it well, but another thing was I just really believe in this new model of education with all of its warts. Like everyone, there's so many things wrong with video education, but still,
Yeah.
The incentives for online learning are so much more free. You can go learn from somebody for free if you want to,
Right.
or you can sign up for an ISA, an income share agreement, where they're incentivized to. It's a legal agreement where they make a share of your future earnings, which is how Lambda School does it.
Yeah.
And if that contract is in place, then the person who owns your ISA has an interest in you actually getting a job,
Which is very different from I guess. Well, you went to the University of Oklahoma, so you can actually directly contrast them.
Right. Exactly.
The experience.
Exactly. And when I came to the University of Oklahoma, I was a crazy person. I was obsessed.
Boomer Sooners.
Yeah, exactly. Boomer Sooner. I was just this kid fresh out of high school from, the suburban Boise area, who is obsessed with theology and filmmaking. And like, nobody was telling me you're doing the wrong thing. No one's telling me, like probably some people did, but like,
Not
really. I was just on this track to get the wrong degree, basically.
Right.
And like, the school's like, sure, we'll take your money.
Right. Oh yeah, we'd be happy to. Right. Sign here. Sign on the dotted line.
Mm-hmm.
It is concerning when we do this too. I keep saying this. There's immense social pressure to sign on the dotted line for children, and then they get this. You sign up a lot of people for a boat anchor of debt, which you can't go bankrupt on.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't go like this is insanity. If you get a car, at least you can go bankrupt on it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're really ambitious, then you get a really big anchor in the form of law school debt.
Exactly. Oh, yes, that's right. Even bigger, and they will be happy to have you as well.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You mentioned the ISA, and you went through Lambda School, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have two Lambda School folks that work with us at Tanjo, and we met before while you were in the program, so I didn't have the same experience, but. With the other student, it was amazing how aggressive the salespeople were, and Jessica, I'll call you out. I'm really happy. It was awesome. It was so inspiring to me. As we were getting them all on board and stuff, how she would she just follow up every day. She's calling me, she's shooting me emails. And I was like, man, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill would not be doing the same for me. Let me tell you that.
Oh man. No.
The power of incentives, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The university, once you leave, like you're just a name on the mailing list, right?
Yep.
And Lambda really believes in their students.
It's really cool.
They have your entire Slack history. They can at any point they can refresh their memory on how you acted in a particular scenario.
Isn't that cool?
So like legibility kind of works in a student's favor there, right?
That's true.
It works two ways. That's probably something that a lot of Lambda students don't think about that much, but if you are really applying yourself, it's clear, and people will advocate for you.
Yeah, and I think also the good thing about Lambda School is I think they have, correct me if I'm wrong, but more flexibility in curriculum than like someone that goes and gets a BS in computer science. Because, I talked to a lot of BS in computer science applicants and things of that nature, and the real problem was, it's like Lambda School, they've been educated and they spent a ton of time on the most modern stuff that exists. So they're up to speed, like completely on modern technology. Whereas, people that have gone through a BS computer science, it's unclear whether they can even build anything.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That jives with so many people I've talked to, like, because if you have a tenured professor who is, the tenured professor might be really passionate about keeping up with modern stuff, and they might not.
Yeah.
And there might, in fact, be very few people in that department who want to update the curriculum that way. And because of the institution, depending on what institution it was, like I'm sure the University of Oklahoma, just judging, this is not even computer science, but their business school was, I guarantee you, 30 years in the past.
Isn't that amazing?
It was incredible. There was not a single mention of like Salesforce or anything in that whole experience. I went to business school.
Very cool.
Lambda by contrast, you have 9 months of full-time, like a 40-hour-a-week education. Your butt's in the seat like 8 hours a day. And you are focusing on the things that are most important to do the job. We learned so like I had the advantage of coming in with some computer science background. I had like read a whole theory of computation textbook, the Sipser textbook.
Do you recommend that?
Yeah, it's really dry, but it's really good.
It's really good.
So I had some background in it. I'd also done Project Euler problems, which are like math problems that you do with code. But basically, the computer science aspect of it is like trying to show you the things that are most used in data science. Like learning, you learn like what is a hash map, you make your own. You learn what is a neural network, you make your own from scratch. You learn what are the how does the von Neumann architecture work, and you make your own in Python.
Really?
Which is not the same as like writing it in C. You write your byte strings as like literal like Python strings, but it's still like it gives you a sense of what the computer is doing under the hood, enough to function in that job if you have to touch something that is performance heavy. So there was just there were a lot of instructors who were constantly. Oh yeah, this is another aspect of it. The cycle that matters in Lambda School is not a year long, but a month long.
Oh, really?
Every month they're bringing in a new cohort. So every month they're getting new feedback from students on that unit they just did.
Yeah.
And they're reformulating it right there.
That's cool.
Yeah. Huge, really rapid iteration.
That's so interesting to me, because it seems like, we were talking about voice and exit earlier. It seems like it's almost impossible to go back and go to the University of Oklahoma or the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, one of these ancient institutions, and say, hey, we're going to completely upend this model and do something new. It seems like there's just too much institutional, entropy and like craziness to ever reform these institutions. I don't know. Feels like the Catholic Church back in the Martin Luther. I don't know.
Yeah, I could maybe make a comparison between my OU's old president and Pope Francis, maybe. But I think that's probably right. Like, I don't know. I hope that COVID shakes universities up quite a lot and just introduces a lot of competition to them, because their model, like they just need to go down. Like,
They do.
From a research perspective, like, fine, that's great. You need a university with reputation and clout backing research and funding research in this educational manner. I think that's great.
Yeah.
But also corporate labs are fully capable of doing the same thing. It's just that for some reason in the past 70 years or so, corporate labs have been sort of declining in popularity. And I think that's a real shame. And I want to see I want to see people start like thinking of, I don't know, just like stop, glorifying this institution that doesn't really have.
It's just gone completely off the rails.
It is. It's ultimately an incentives problem. You can have good people at a university, but if the incentives aren't there, then it's going to be like your New Year's resolution. It flops like 20% down the road.
Yeah, exactly. That's very interesting. My big proposal is just change the bankruptcy laws. Like for student loans, just change the bankruptcy laws. It's now just like normal consumer debt. And I think that would fix a lot of the wackiness that's going on.
Huh. Well, that does seem like a really simple solution. I'm curious whether it would work.
Yeah. I don't know. We've got this huge lobby that's really against it, though, so I don't know.
Yeah. Those dang lobbies.
Yeah, I tell you what. This brings up another point I wanted to ask you about. So, you've told me a couple of interesting anecdotes about meaning and modernity, and it seems like this seems to be a huge problem. Just like people have a lot of trouble nowadays finding meaning in their lives, and why do you think that is? Do you think that is that tied into technology? What do you think is going on there? Is that a real problem even? I should say beforehand.
Yeah. I'll tell you, this is one of the questions I didn't really prep for.
That's all good.
I saw it on there and I'm like, I don't know what I think of that.
Yeah.
Well, so yeah, I think that there is a lack of meaning in Western societies for sure. I'm not well traveled enough to speak to the rest of the world. If Bollywood's anything to go by, the Indians have plenty of meaning in their life.
That's right.
In their lives, and it's really wonderful. But this is like a really widespread thesis that that some magic is lost. I read an article the other day this morning to the effect of the multiverse theory is destroying culture.
Really?
Because everyone likes to imagine that like all the alternative worlds are just going on at the same time. You see that in Rick and Morty, like this nihilistic sort of comedy that's like, I don't know. It's really funny, but it's also like it just takes the piss out of everything.
Yeah.
And so I find it difficult to judge this for myself because I come from a really weird upbringing where philosophical and theological questions were like first and foremost.
Interesting.
Like you could disagree with the concept of God existing if you wanted to, like where I went to school, but you had to at least have an argument for it, and you had to have like, you had to be pondering these questions and truly constantly orienting yourself to the true, the good, the beautiful. Those are the three things that I said. So part of me thinks that this is why I think I'm so interested in education, is because like education is so clearly the vector for which this, like any of these things occur.
Interesting.
And I mean that in a very general sense, like the way that you self-improve is your meaning. Your orientation towards your future self, I think, is in the Western world what it means to have meaning.
Interesting.
I haven't unraveled like the human being to say like, oh, this is what matters for the human being, like biologically. Right. There's all kinds of things in the mix there, but like we know that achievement is important, and what is there to achieve in the modern world? This reminds me, I'm starting to sound like Cody Wilson.
Oh God.
But like, what is there to achieve in the modern world? You can build a business.
Yes.
You can start a family. That's really countercultural.
That is actually now. Isn't that weird? Societies that are like that don't last very long, it seems like.
Yeah. Japan's hanging in there.
Yeah, they are. I don't know, somehow.
Yeah. So you can do that. You can discover something scientific. You can make a piece of art. But all these things are like, I want to say the word commodified, but it's common. You see
all over the place.
Yeah, we're like inundated with all this cool stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And anything anyone does. Like I think you mentioned in a call once that you had gone to China.
Yeah.
A long time ago. And I didn't even pounce on it because I was like, oh, of course he's gone to China. Like every college student I know has like gone abroad or whatever. Yeah. Like who cares? He probably did. He probably like went to bars and like met some business people.
Exactly right.
But like I'm sure you have good stories to tell about China.
Yeah.
And like the fact that I see that stuff like that's like common, it changes things. I don't know. Also, I think there's, I don't know. There's a lot. I feel like I'm rambling here.
No, this is great.
I think there's also a crisis of meaning because class consciousness is like, it's sort of over complete in America in the sense that like everybody is super class aware and they're like super aware of their position in the world. But it's like they're constantly spinning off narratives that don't really like end anywhere. What am I trying to say with this? So like middle class kids, like you or I perhaps, like they leave home in their 20s and then they're starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Not only professionally, because they usually aren't joining the family business. Sometimes they are, but they're also starting from scratch spiritually. They don't have any like project that extends before them, and this is why a lot of people will go for like they'll just get super deep into a certain hobby because that hobby is like their connection to the past, to history.
Interesting.
And I struggle with that because a lot of the people that I hate the most are I see as pathologically nostalgic.
Interesting.
I don't hate a lot of people, but the people that really get on my nerves are stuck in the past, from my point of view. And yet a connection to history is undeniably important. And just in orienting yourself towards the future.
Right.
And that's just a real struggle for a lot of people. Yeah. I don't feel like I gave you a good answer, but that's my basic thoughts.
No, that's good. It's a hard question. I wanted to move a little bit now and talk about, we've covered this a little bit, but machine learning. So, what are your kind of, what do you see coming down the pike that interests you, is exciting? Do you think it's overhyped at this point? Do you think, I think people, these words, they're very general and people get, they're confused with like AGI and things like that. I don't know.
Yeah, that bugs me a lot. It bugs me a lot that the word AI is thrown around just because like, it makes people think of AGI. It makes people think of like, oh, businesses out there actually own something approximating a mind.
Yeah, exactly. It's here.
And, and maybe that hits a little too close to home since I built something called a form brain recently. It basically just classifies tax documents. And that was not my choice to call it that. But it's basically... So I think that AI, the field of AI is special in the sciences because it's so focused on intelligence itself.
Interesting.
Science is a project to, like broadly speaking, is a project to expand our knowledge about how to know things and how to use that knowledge, how to sort of reclaim the outside, like take something that is literally outside of your worldview and outside of your personal perspective, or outside of our cultural perspective, and incorporate it. We're taking chaos and ordering it. And I like to think of that as intelligence itself. That is like what intelligence is learning how to bootstrap a truer representation of the world, or bootstrap like power over the truth or power over reality. So what current machine learning systems can do is sort of like it's taken such huge leaps, but it's not really, I don't think it's anywhere close to where it needs to be. So Kant, the philosopher Immanuel Kant, he has like this framework, this threefold framework for like how a mind works, essentially, or it's like how intelligence like occurs. It's like, one, it has to have some kind of like sensory input to like apprehend like sensory data, and then it like orders it in some basic sense. And then the second step is that it notices invariances in that sensory data to sort of craft and to just like recognize objects, essentially.
Interesting.
So just viewed in many different contexts, here's a thing that I can pick out of the noise.
Right.
And then third, you contextualize that knowledge of objects inside of a worldview that is linguistically framed. Interesting. So machine learning can do the first two things pretty well. I think the first step only really requires basic, like it requires traditional computing.
Yeah.
Just to like, to get and store data and organize it. The second step is what machine learning is really doing right now. You have neural networks that are really good at taking just a few examples of something that is and something that isn't a category, and then just saying, oh yeah, that's the category.
Gotcha.
And you basically just, all of machine learning is just various flavors of that. The huge GPT-3 model.
Yeah.
It's basically just a really complex, really complex way of learning what positions words usually go together in, right?
Like interesting.
Like what order they usually go in. It's a disembodied Broca's region that cost like $10 million to make.
Yeah, that's
right?
great.
So it can put words in the right order, much like a Harvard MBA can, but it can't actually it can't synthesize new thoughts. Like
gotcha.
what is generated from GPT-3 is not a thought. It's just an ordering. It's just a probable ordering of words. So what needs to happen for machine learning to get to that next step is the ability to play language games.
Gotcha.
Instead of statistically analyzing the order the words come in, it should be able to play games within games, right? If I just start a sentence saying, riddle me this, right?
Yeah.
I've started a game that you know how to play.
Right.
And like whatever I say afterwards is in that context. And a true intelligence can do that and learn to bootstrap that knowledge onto something else and grow its apprehension.
Right. And that's the bridge too far right now.
Right. And it's not going to take, I don't think it's going to take more like bigger neural networks.
That's not the answer then.
It'll definitely involve more neural networks, but that won't be the secret sauce. That's really easy to say. That's not even that daring of a thing to say, but like I don't think that if you wanted to make something that was brain-like using current neural network technology, you would need something bigger than the Earth. You would need a computer bigger than the Earth. So it might come from like neuromorphic computing. It might come from quantum computing. I don't know, but there's going to have to be some phase shift.
Have you ever read the Robin Hanson book, Age of M?
I read like 2 pages of it just out of curiosity. Did you read it?
I did.
Okay. Cool.
Do you know much about that? Just the idea, we get really good microscopes, we can tell what's going on in the brain. We just create a computer simulation of actually a human brain, and that's how we get there. We don't even have to understand much of anything.
That's one pathway. I think, one thing I've learned in just studying this stuff is that there are a lot of ways you could do it.
Gotcha.
And what it comes down to is, what do they call it? The hardware lottery. It's just whatever makes business sense and whatever you get people stoked about, that will become the mainstream way to do it. And your way might be theoretically sound, but no one's going to follow it.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. But
sorry, I interrupted you.
No. That's really well put. I think that's an important thing to realize when we think about these things. How scared do you think we should be of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I go back and forth over that. Because when I first started out, like the whole reason I got into this career was I read this post by Wait But Why. It's this famous blog.
Great blog.
Yeah, it's a great blog. Super just fun to read. And it's this. They had this long multi article series on AI risk, and the idea is basically that artificial intelligence, like intelligence itself, might be totally orthogonal to morality. Like it might be unrelated to morality.
Interesting.
So that an intelligence that learns to learn really quickly and connects to the internet and gets all of its knowledge, can bootstrap its intelligence really fast, maybe overnight, and it might look like a really smart spider that cares about humans about just as much.
Yeah.
Right. And so I worried about this for like, a good 2 years.
Yeah.
Like, and I got really paranoid about it, and it's kind of embarrassing. I still sound like a crazy person today when I talk about what I do for work.
Yeah.
But I don't sound like quite as much of a crazy person now. I think it's worth worrying about. And it's worth spending more resources than we currently are on it. And people who think they can achieve something in that to mitigate that risk should absolutely go for it.
Yeah.
I have a friend who is currently he just got accepted this week to something called an EA hotel, an effective altruism hotel, where he can go and spend 6 months doing experiments on AI safety.
Isn't that cool? That's cool.
And I think that's great. What makes me less worried nowadays is just I'm starting to wonder if the problem is solvable, for one thing.
Interesting.
Which kind of maybe takes the stress off. Another thing is that maybe intelligence isn't orthogonal to morality after all.
Yeah.
And that's sort of my hope. I mean, I have moved on from a Christian worldview that I was raised in.
Yeah.
You're actually a Christian, aren't you?
Yes, I'm Quaker. Okay,
sweet. Well, so what I was saying was I've moved on from my Christian upbringing beyond that conception of right and wrong. But I do believe that I am a moral realist, and I think that
interesting.
I think that just like math is a thing that exists.
Yeah.
Even though our system of math is just one contingency in set theory.
Right.
I think it exists, and an intelligence that had overtaken human intelligence. I think it's plausible that it would at least along the way integrate what we consider to be right and wrong, and at least develop from there.
Interesting.
So I'm not as sold on it being just a big spider.
Yeah, exactly. I think that makes sense, and I think another thing to think about is that people will build it, and so it'll probably end of the day people are deeply flawed, and they're good and they're bad, and it'll probably end up something like that too. Yeah, and
I've just admitted that I basically have let myself off the hook a little bit because I used to have nightmares about this kind of thing, right? And I don't recommend that other people let themselves off the hook if they're really worried about it.
Right.
Talk to other people about it, of course, but
yeah,
and really reason about it. It's just if it's something worth worrying about, then we should do what we can. But probably we shouldn't try to make a slave out of AI. Because I don't think it'll work.
No, but yeah, that's a good point.
I think that it'll just be a stopgap, like that kind of safety approach, and alignment probably has to do with, discovering something fundamental about mathematics.
Right. That's super interesting. Yeah, and I'm also the opinion there's another risk I think people don't talk about when they talk about AI safety, and it's that AI just never happens because we keep pumping the brakes because we're worried about AI safety. There's some balance there, and there's so few
asymptotically approaching it.
Yeah, exactly. There's so few sources of growth in our economy now, and if we slam the brakes on information technology, it's like what's left. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Know.
Yeah. And that's part of my thinking on that's part of what motivates me with respect to governments as well. It's just that governments are manifestly slowing innovation in a lot of sectors.
Definitely.
I don't know. I shouldn't really get into that, honestly, because there's two stories there. Like one in which technology is outrunning government,
right?
And this is the libertarian perspective on it. Cryptocurrency is innovating faster than it can be regulated. On the other hand, it's holding back all these other sectors. And if economic growth continues to stagnate, we might not have we might not reach escape velocity, right? As a civilization.
You end up in some feudal wackiness.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, Coop, thanks for coming on. Is there anything else you would like to add? Anywhere you'd like to send people? Any cool resources?
Cool resources. I would say if anyone listening is, hating their job and feeling like they have a dead end, consider becoming a web developer at Lambda School, because their data science program is great. But it's not for everybody, and it's still a work in progress. Yeah. I would say their web development program is second to none, and it's nice. It's just amazing. And you can have a future if you just start there. That's really cool. So I highly recommend that. That's about all I have to say.
Where can people find your stuff? Should they try and find your stuff?
They shouldn't try to find my stuff. I have one crappy little blog that I don't put anything on.
Gotcha.
That's about it. I mean, just keep Googling Cooper Williams podcast, and maybe you'll see something else interesting.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have to have you back on again.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks, Coop.
This has been fun.
Awesome. Well, that's our show for today. I'm Will Jarvis.
And I'm Will's dad.
Join us next week for more narratives.